Good morning, party people. Welcome. Oh, and Goonie Jam Jam, welcome to the club. Howdy. It is another Saturday here in sunny San Diego. I always say sunny San Diego, and of course, it's like never sunny at this time of the. Ibrahim is in the Maldives. Dang. That's on our bucket list of stuff to go see. My wife really wants to go see the Maldives at some point. Surly says, shall I open the question queue? It is actually already opened. That just opened just a second ago. I think Richie's probably in there too, poking around in there. Both of y'all are moderators there. So yeah, the Maldives have always been on Erica's bucket list. Sujit says the car is back. The car is back because I have wanted one of these for like almost 10 years since they came out in 2012. And there's one up for auction. This never happens. Because the only one I want is I want a French Racing Blue XKRS. And there's one up for auction right now under Bring a Trailer. So I'm watching that maniacally. It closes Monday afternoon. I'm so incredibly excited about that. Let's see here. Someone says that the question queue was open and then closed again. All right, so for those of y'all who are moderators, let's not touch that. Let's let me manage that for now, just so that I can get that taken care of and not have to worry about jumping back and forth. So let's see here. Let me go get that up and running. Looks like it's set to go for questions. I'm just going to ask a test question just to make sure that that works. And it looks like there it goes. So we do have questions up and running. So for those of y'all who want to ask questions, you can go ahead and hit it at polgab.com/room/Brento. You can go ask questions over there. I only have about an hour in order to do questions today. It's a little bit shorter because I have an emergency client starting at 8 a.m. Pacific, and I got to go grab breakfast before there. So just hope you get the car, and then maybe you can have a session from inside the car one day. I've talked about doing that in the Porsche, just to like give people a walk around of it at some point and do a streaming session from inside there. Because now I have an iPhone 5G, so I can actually. Nope, you have to ask the questions up there. That's why it says that up there at the top. Morning party people, Richard. Powell had asked, any chance for a second season of Have Brent Analyze Your Weight Stats? It's always possible. It depends on my schedule is all it comes down to, just how much time I have available. And that's actually what I do for a consulting living. So I probably wouldn't do it for the public. It probably would be something I would do for the live class season pass holders, though. That might be something I would do there. So let's see, let's go ahead and hit the first question. And of course, because we have a limited amount of time, y'all's votes will be important today. Like, so if there's one that you see that you like more than others, because I'll only go through the top voted questions. Michael Jackson says, I had a stored procedure this week that was causing TempDB to run out of space. That's so funny. I'm actually working on rehearsing my TempDB classes for Monday. I have a fundamentals of TempDB class. I looked at the stored procedure, and all I noticed were that there were some large CTEs, and I think those are forced to run in TempDB. Any thoughts? No, I don't know where people get this, that CTEs are forced to run in TempDB. It has absolutely nothing to do with TempDB whatsoever. So there are several things that could be related to this that could be happening. Your transaction could be running in snapshot isolation mode or even RCSI. If someone, and I say transaction, it doesn't even have to be a transaction. If it's a big, huge read-only query that's taken a long time to run or it's being blocked, that can cause the version store to continue to take up space. That's one thing that'll do it. Another thing that'll do it is if that query spills to disk for some reason. If SQL Server lowballs the memory grant initially and then comes back and decides that it has to raise up, or comes back and gets a way more data than it originally expected to get, then the query will spill to disk. And that can use TempDB, but it's not anything to do with just CTE. Now, you did say large CTEs, which makes me think that maybe the query's bringing back millions of rows and the query got a real lowball memory grant and spilled to disk. If you're on SQL Server 2019, you can run SP Blitz Who. That will show you the live execution plan for the query, including the parts that are spilling to disk. If you're on earlier versions, you can run SP who is active, and you can look at their TempDB allocations. That'll tell you whether or not the thing purposely needed TempDB space, like if someone was dealing with temp tables. All kinds of ways you can diagnose that. And I would wish I could give you a short answer on it, but that's why I have an entire day-long fundamentals of TempDB class. Next up, we have Sujith asks, hi Brent, during your database administrator days, did you ever run a query on production that wasn't supposed to? What happened and how did you deal with it? Yeah, I sure did. Even before I was officially a database administrator, one of my earliest memories of dealing with databases. So I was a systems administrator at a photography studio, kind of photography studio that would do high school class photos. And then they would, every morning during high school graduation photo or school class photo season, the photographers would come in first thing in the morning, and I had to print out all the labels for their film canisters, because this is old, all the performance of their... I had to print out all the labels for their film canisters. So we would print them all out and then lay them all out in packets so that they could come in, grab the appointments that they had for the day and their labels, and then head out. Well, I would come in first thing every morning, which worked perfectly for my sleep schedule. I would come in first thing in the morning and I would do that work. But as part of my work, I also had to rotate the backup tapes, and I had to run update queries and things like that. Well, I ran a delete with no where clause, like we all do. And fortunately, I was in really early in the morning, so I was able to go, all right, well, I just totally screwed up. Thankfully, I know where the backups are, and I restore the, copy the backup, take tapes around, move them around. So I said, I know exactly what to do. I put last night's backup tape back in. I knew I was the only one who'd made changes. I started the database restore process. And my boss came in. This guy had an epic temper, was just incredibly loud, angry. When he would get pissed, he would throw things and swear. Legendary for firing people, just right on the drop of a hat. And so when he came in, I said, I remember a story about that. That was pretty funny. When he came in, I said, okay, look, here's the deal. I ran a delete without a where clause. I trashed the database. I'm in the middle of restoring the database. You can fire me. Like, I expect you to fire me, and I don't have a problem with that. I'll take my stuff and leave. I said, but don't fire me until I'm done restoring the database and printing out your labels, because he was one of the photographers too. Printing out your labels, because if you do, you're not going to know where to go. You're not going to know which students have photography sessions for today. I said, just fire me after I get done with the restore. I said, I'll take it perfectly fine. And he was super angry, but there was nothing he could do. And he also realized I kind of had him, by the short and curlies. And I said, and I'll take it. You can yell at me and all that. And he's like, well, I'll be back. So he goes off and gets his coffee and whatever else, and the restore is finished, and I print out the labels, which gave him enough time to cool off, and he comes back in, didn't say a word about it, took his labels. And somebody else says later, well, aren't you going to fire Brent for that? And he said, no. He says, Brent actually was a good example there. He took accepted responsibility for that. He held himself accountable for it. That's what I wish all of you would do. And I was like, wow, okay, that actually kind of worked out. And that did teach me a lesson that I'm really privileged in that I don't have any dependents. If I wanted to get fired, like if I was in a bad career position, I didn't mind getting fired. So I didn't mind standing up to people in the right way that worked for me along the way. I have also had instances where I did have people counting on me in the form of like dependents, and it did not go as well. So, but that was one of my favorite episodes. I've had lots of other instances, but that one's one of my favorites. Next up, Bob the Lobster says, good afternoon from a sunny United Kingdom. Howdy, sir. How would you go about troubleshooting parameter sniffing on apps using Entity Framework and other ORMs? For me, really, it's no different than stored procedures. It just may be that changes to the stored procedures I may not be allowed to do. That happens sometimes with vendor applications, encrypted stored procedures, etc. So I would approach it exactly the same way. Run SP-Blitz cache, look at queries that have suddenly bolted to the top out of nowhere. Once you've identified those queries, you want to save the bad plan that's in cache, and I kind of jokingly say bad plan. They're not really such thing as a good plan and a bad plan, just all plans that are inappropriate for certain kinds of parameters. So save that plan that isn't working out so well, then go through things like the plan cache over time, logged with SP-Blitz cache to table, query store, SP-Blitz-who logged to table over time, identify a plan that works better for more sets of parameters, and figure out how you can get SQL Server to go down the route of that plan. Sometimes it involves changes to indexes, sometimes it involves a plan guide, sometimes it involves working with the developers who've got it in Entity Framework and ORMs and saying, hey, I need you to change this particular one into a stored procedure, but that's a last resort. I can usually solve the problem with changes to indexes or with a plan guide, and I talk about those in my Fundamentals of Parameter Sniffing class and my Mastering Parameter Sniffing classes. Adam says, some things that prevents updates or deletes without a where clause could be built into SSMS. There are third-party add-ins that do. Redgate's SQL prompt has the capability to do it. There's another one, SSMS Tools Pack, that does it as well. And they ask for confirmations whenever you do it, because you actually do need to do it a lot more than you think you do. Temp tables is a great example that I see all the time. Next up we have, next highest voted question is from Ralph. Is it enabled to recommend, or is it recommended to enable hyperthreading? These days there are less and less people running on physical servers than there used to be. There are still much more of the audience is either running under virtual servers or in the cloud, both of which in both cases you don't really have any choice over the hyperthreading piece. For my clients who are running bare metal physical servers, I usually do recommend enabling hyperthreading. There's one exception. Just because you suddenly enable hyperthreading and you have twice as many logical processors does not mean you have twice as much cache. So processors have cache that's divided out between the cores. You've now essentially cut the amount of cache per core in half. So if you had operations that were extremely sensitive to the amount of cache per CPU core, then it can backfire. I don't know a lot of workloads that are that susceptible. Usually people are better off enabling hyperthreading. It's not going to suddenly double your performance. Even if you're dealing with CPU intensive code, you're only looking at say 30, 40, 50% more CPU performance, but essentially it's kind of free. It's a totally different, yeah, exactly. It's totally different depending in the virtual and cloud environment though. Next up, Malik says, one of my friends says, does everyday rebuilding indexes cause parameter sniffing issues? Yes, essentially what you're doing when you rebuild indexes is you're also updating statistics, which causes parts of the plan cache to disappear from memory. So essentially what you're doing is playing Russian roulette. You're spinning the barrel on the gun and pointing it at your head, hoping that the next set of parameters that come in will be beneficial for everyone through the day. It's funny how I know so many people who go, I have to rebuild indexes every day or else I get bad performance. And then they wake up every morning and they come into work and they're like, why do I have such bad, why am I having all these parameter sniffing emergencies? It's because you caused it. Because by rebuilding indexes every day, you're really blowing your plan cache overnight, causing parameter sniffing every day. Now, I talk about this a lot. I talk about it a lot in public. I talk about it in my Fundamentals of Parameter Sniffing classes, and people don't seem to learn. People still keep thinking that it's a really good idea. Hi, folks, to ask questions, make sure to read up here. People still think it's a good idea to rebuild indexes every day, and I'm kind of okay with it. Because I like idiots with money. I like them a lot. Idiots with money are going to be the reason that I'm going to be able to afford one of these someday. But until then, I just recommend that you either not be an idiot or not be an idiot with money, one of the two. Next up, RV asks, what is your opinion on cross apply? I never use it. Do you think it's worth it to learn usage patterns with this? Yes, depending on what you're trying to do. So, here's the way that I think of it. If you write T-SQL for a living, and you haven't read one of Itzik Ben-Ghan's books, you're doing yourself a disservice. Itzik Ben-Ghan has fantastic T-SQL tutorial books that will really challenge you to go to the next level. If you're still using the same T-SQL syntax that you originally used, now don't read anything into that, Peter. Pete. So if you're still using the same T-SQL syntax that you used 10 years ago, 5 years ago, then it's probably time to broaden your horizons, and Itzik Ben-Ghan's books are one of the greatest ways to broaden your horizons. CW Train absolutely nails it there. Wonderful books. Just really enjoy those books. Enjoy is a weird word. I mean, they challenge you. They're not like a fun read. It's not like the Twilight series. I haven't read the Twilight series, as far as you know. Joachim, well, good to see you again, says, my former colleague told me, I like it, that's a twist on the my friend says. My former colleague told me, said you should set database max size to 32 gigs so migrations can be faster. What? How? Why? Who in the... I can't even comprehend where they got that idea from. This is one of those things. AM2, Andy says, good to see you. Andy says, that is my reaction to this colleague too. I'm like stunned. So what does he think, your former colleague, what does he think people do when they have 5, 10 terabyte databases? I mean, that just doesn't even make sense. I bet that friend of yours had read something and he was really close. He just didn't understand the full context or perspective. So I don't know where they got that. They might be onto something, but I've never heard anything like that. And you can kind of tell by the reactions of the people inside the chat that's just bananas. I've never heard anything like that. But I also like that you had the courage to ask. So that is kind of awesome. That's why he's a former colleague, Kurt says. Next up, Amit's highest voted question was, hi Brent, I don't know if this is related, but can you explain a bit how to scale hardware based on database capacity and give me shed? You want me to take you out to the shed? In the South, that's what we call beating the heck out of somebody. You go out to the shed and you get a whip, but it's like a tail, the cat of 9 tails or whatever, and you beat them. And some people pay for that kind of thing. I tend to get it for free. But I'm going to ignore the second question because we're only going to do one question per question. But up on the top one, plus I don't want to give you shed this early in the morning. Hi, Brent. So I'm going to focus on the first one, how to scale hardware based on capacity. So the more hardware that you add, the faster your database is going to go. I'm not sure how else to say that. I'm trying to come up with a longer way to say that, and I don't really have anything. There are some kinds of workloads that don't scale with hardware. Locking is a great example. For example, the client that I'm dealing with on this morning's performance emergency, they have a whole lot of lock waits happening, and they've already thrown hardware at it. So now we get to go and see how else we're going to solve those kinds of problems. But someone takes out a lock, then it doesn't matter how much hardware you have. As long as they're holding a lock out, you're just kind of screwed. But other than that, and there are other kinds of waits that are similar. Resource semaphores, another good one. But in terms of that, give me a more specific question about what you're asking there. Next up, Binu, good to see you again, Binu, says, truncate partition causes a lag on availability groups. Is it a lesser cost than deletes? So the nice thing is that you can experiment with those kinds of things and just try yourself, right? So this is like several questions in a row that I haven't really answered, so I feel kind of guilty. Truncating partitions causing a lag on an AG. So if you're doing truncates of partitions, here's what you really want to do is partition switch. What you want to do is partition switch so that you can switch out a completely empty table. Then you can just drop that table, and there's no lag in the AGs for that. Now, however, though, I will say one thing. It might be that when you say lag on an AG, you might be trying to get a schema modification lock, because truncates need a schema modification lock. So will, the only reason I mention that is so will partition switching. If you want to switch out an empty partition, you're going to need a schema modification lock on that as well. So if you're doing a synchronous AG and someone's querying the secondary, I have seen this. People think that they can run reporting queries on an AG secondary for free and it's not going to cost them anything. This is an example of where it will, because the commits on the secondary, or the reports on the secondary, will hold up the schema modification lock on the primary. So if that's what the scenario is that you're hitting, then by all means consider offloading reports to an async secondary instead, or you'll need to do the truncates during a maintenance window. And when I say maintenance window, I don't mean that you have to take the server down. I just mean you need to do it during a lower load of activity. Next highest one is Stuart. Oh man, we got all kinds of questions in here. This is fantastic. So let's see here. We'll go ahead and clear out a couple things there. So Stuart says, some of our apps use nhibernate and entity framework exclusively. I'm fine with simple type queries. The queries that result are horrid and hard to read. Have you encountered this in consulting? Yes. And I've even talked about this a couple times too. I know some database administrators are like, entity framework writes terrible queries. You should learn to write T-SQL. You should handcraft all your queries and make them elegant like ballerinas. And I'm like, well, how do you think people ship features in the real world? People don't have the time to learn T-SQL. And if I just laid down the law and said, all right, everyone, no more ORMs. They're terrible. They write, from now on, you're going to handcraft all your SQL. Three things are going to happen in this order. Number one, it's going to take much longer to ship features because it takes much longer to write T-SQL than it does to use nhibernate or entity framework. Number two, you're suddenly going to deal with really bad queries. If you think EF and nhibernate write bad queries, wait until you see what an untrained developer does. And then number three, the third thing that will happen in order is you will be removed from that decision-making capacity, because management will say, what the Sam heck were you thinking trying to slow down development and do a worse job? Get out of the way. And they'll either pull you out of the decision-making process, or they'll just put someone else in over ahead of you who's going to override you. So be really careful what you ask for. Next up, I know I'm a terrible person. Lewis says, hi Brent, our developers add option recompile maxstop for all statements inside stored procedures. Stuart, what was I just saying? Stuart, remember how I was just saying a second ago that if you let people write T-SQL, they're going to do a bad job? Stuart, you should have a talk with Lewis there. Understand the pains that Lewis is feeling. Lewis would love your job, Stuart. Lewis would love to deal with the problems that you're facing. Oh. So he says, avoiding parameter sniffing and forcing parallelism. It doesn't. Option maxstop doesn't force parallelism. And I can prove that really easily. So let's go over here into Stack Overflow. I'm going to switch into a Stack Overflow database, and I'm going to say select star from DBO users where display name equals Brent Ozar. If I put in select star from users where display name equals Brent Ozar, and I go look at the execution plan, that's a clustered index scan. So it says right there, clustered index scan. Oh my God, it's bad, right? Oh my goodness, that's really expensive. So you know what we'll do is we'll put in option max dop equals 0 or 4 just to say, and then run it again. Oops, I never remember. There we go. So now if I look in, see, it doesn't actually. Option maxstop just says, here's how many cores I'm willing to use if I go parallel, but it doesn't force parallelism. So coming back over here, it says brings back more CPU pressure in CX packet. Can you tell me about your opinion? So Lewis, I'm so glad that you asked, because most people don't ask me that until they're in such a bad shape that they're having to pay me for consulting. So you're getting in for free. So I have mixed feelings about this. No, Lewis, I love that you're asking this. Here's the problem with option recompile. It works really well until it doesn't. Your CPU keeps going up, 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 and up in order to compile queries, because the SQL Server is spending more and more time to compile queries. When you're facing a CPU problem, it's going to be extremely hard to rip that option recompile back out. But if you don't have that much CPU pressure, then it's okay. That's actually true. If you don't have that much CPU power, I kind of understand why they're doing it. What you have to be ready for is, imagine that your developers suddenly pull out recompile. If they suddenly pull out recompile and you now have parameter sniffing problems, you have to be prepared to deal with that, because parameter sniffing sucks. Of course, it's a hard pain in the rear. So here's what I would do in your shoes. Pick the safest query that could never generate different plans, that runs the most frequently. So the way I would probably start with that is SP Blitz Cache sorting by executions, SP Blitz Cache sort order executions. And then when you do that, you'll see the queries that run the most often. Typically, those are the ones that are safest to deal without recompiles. Oh, no. You won't see it. No. Sorry, I'm sorry. Because they have option recompile, I bet you money that they're doing it in statements. Yep, they're doing it inside statements and stored procedures. I bet that they're also putting it on statements outside of stored procedures too, so you're not going to see it there. So what you want is Eric Darling's SP human events. So you want Eric Darling's SP human events. SP human events is a better way of dealing with extended events. It's really slick. It's super easy. You might have played around with extended events in the past and had to like poke your eyes out because it involved querying XML. But the part that you want is right here. All you have to do is run SP human events looking for compilations or recompilations, and then it'll tell you which queries are running the most frequently. This doesn't take out option recompile. I love where you're going, but it doesn't work that way. So remember, never say the answer. You always say my friend said whenever you're inside a public webcast, because you don't want me pulling your face down or your pants down or your face, putting your face into your pants. So this is fantastic because it'll go through and show you which queries are recompiling the most often, and it even shows you how many distinct plans there are. It's absolutely fantastic. Really love this thing. So if you search for SP human events by that streamer Eric Darling, absolutely fantastic, works wonderfully. Let's see, next highest voted question is from Juan. Juan says, let's see here, I recently received an error connecting via SSMS. A connection was forcibly closed. I can't RDP in and use remote DAC. What could be the root cause of this error? So that would go call Microsoft support, right? If you have a production server outage and SQL Server isn't responding to request, don't make a note in your calendar and go, hey, the next time this thing happens, I'm going to go ask some random streamer. I'm just a guy with a nice fancy camera who knows how to use a Stream Deck. At the end of the day, you don't want me just like giving you free advice on production outage support issues. That's when you go call Microsoft. Because what if it happens twice? So I get the ILO is an interesting thing in order to get to the operating system, but when you get existing connection was forcibly closed by the remote host, you have serious issues, and that isn't something that you want to play around with like a SQL Server webcaster. Your OS could be boned, your hardware could be boned, you have huge issues. Call Microsoft immediately. Now with Microsoft support, here's the deal. Cost $500. Sorry, that's funny. Microsoft support costs $500. To solve the RDP issue would tell you if the OS is messed up big time. Yeah, but what are you going to do? You're just starting your troubleshooting journey. What are you going to do when you find out that the OS is hosed? You're going to call Microsoft, or you're going to pave the thing and redo it for support. $500, call Microsoft, open a support case, and they will work the case with you until it's through. You tell them you have a production outage, and you tell them the number of users who are affected. A lot of people have bad opinions about Microsoft support because they call them when it's not that urgent. They're like, my keyboard has dust in it. My mouse won't work. You know, they call them in all kinds of weird non-critical solutions. I can't read an execution plan. You know, they call all kinds of crazy things. You are one of the people who really needs to call Microsoft support, and they're specialized in working through that kind of issue. They just give you really crappy reports or results when you're like, what is a scalar function? You know, that's where support doesn't work quite as well. Next up, let's see here. Victor asks, what? We have a data warehouse. We use backups and restores to fill it. But it takes a lot of time. Hello, Captain Obvious. We tried to use replication, but it didn't fit either. Do you know better ways to fill a data warehouse? Yes. Sorry, I'm a little incredulous there. It just really surprises me that you haven't heard of this thing called ETL, extract, transform, and load. What you do, and Andy says, I'm right there with you. I haven't figured out how to do this yet either. That person right there, Andy Leonard on Twitch, is the person to follow who will enlighten you on how to do that kind of process. What you want to do is connect an application to your production source systems, extract just the data you need, just the data that's changed since the last time you did an extract. Extract it, transform it, kind of like a remix, you know, and then load it into the data warehouse that's going to be its final destination. That's not the only way. Some people do extract, load, and transform. There are all kinds of different design patterns that you can do, but the design pattern that you're talking about is called Groundhog Day, where every day you wake up and reload the whole entire thing from scratch. That doesn't work. That doesn't scale. And you're not alone to, 32 terabytes, it should work fine. You're not alone in that sucks pretty bad. So that guy right there, Andy Leonard, he also streams on Twitch. So you can go to twitch.tv/Andy Leonard, and he streams all the time on weekends too as well. Plus you can watch your past ones. That's not what remixes look like. So there was a time when I had like a Tractor on my iPad, and I would use that on planes, like doing beat matching and stuff on planes, and it was just fun. It's a fun way to deal with airplanes. Andy, I'm going to stop at 7 a.m. Pacific, so I'm going to stop in 30 minutes just so that you're aware. So, and then we'll raid your channel after that if you're going to stream around then. Just to give you the heads up, because I didn't want you surprised in 30 minutes when I go to stop, but just because I have a client starting at 8. Interesting. Next up, Chetan says, what's the best option for Service Broker for transactional operations? Service Broker isn't working for us anymore. My answer would depend on where your server's hosted. If you are in Azure, Azure has some kind of queuing thing. I just don't do a lot of Azure work. Amazon Web Services has SQS, simple queuing services. If you're running on-premises, you need Serato Pro. Oh, just stare it! Our neighborhood DJ, one of our neighborhood SQL Server DJs. RabbitMQ is the one that you would use if you're like on premises. RabbitMQ is a queuing process. The good news is all these are cheap. All these are cheap and they scale like crazy, as opposed to Service Broker is just really expensive. So those are the places that I would go: is RabbitMQ if you're on premises, Amazon's SQS, simple queuing services, if you're up at Amazon's cloud, and for Azure, whatever the equivalent of SQS is over there. I don't know how. Usually, and it's not, I'm telling like I'm making fun of Azure's names. Usually Azure's names are pretty straightforward. I do kind of like that. Whereas Amazon's like Amazon Kendra, and I'm like, what on earth does that do? Hey, Chronicle, bonus points if you read the top up there. I know I hid it away right at the top of the screen to make it really hard to find. Next up, Richard says, a query runs in 35 minutes. Oh man, this is what, so that's what I said, rabbit MQ. And I may have only said that 4 or 5 times, so I'll say it one more time there for Neil, rabbit MQ. So next up, a query runs in 35 minutes. And as soon as I read this, I'm like, oh God, this is one of those a train leaves Philadelphia kinds of questions. And I'm like, no, I suck at math. Please don't expose this. I mean, and I'm always perfectly clear about the fact that I suck at math. It runs in 35 minutes unless we run max stop 1, and it runs in 2. Looking at the plan, all the data is going on one thread. Updating stats didn't fix it. The table is partitioned. Have you seen this before? I have. This is one of my favorite problems to solve, Richard, and I have a whole entire session on it in my mastering server tuning class. So if you go to my mastering server tuning class and watch the module on abnormal parallelism, I spend about an hour explaining it and showing how to change parts of the query. I'm going to give you the short version. Break the query up into parts. So what I do is I take the execution plan and I kind of think of it as taking an X-Acto knife. This isn't an X-Acto knife. This is the most expensive pen I ever got. This is the pen that I got for going through the Microsoft Certified Master Program, and the label's like worn away and everything, but that master program cost me $20,000, so I have a hard time throwing this pen away. So instead, what you do is look at the execution plan, find the spot where you really could break it up because it finishes quickly and the parallelism is wrong. Break that part out and then run it into a temp table. Then join that temp table to the rest of the query. Then that way, SQL Server will understand how many rows are in that temp table, and it'll make better parallelism decisions from that point forward. You can get a rough idea of what I mean by that by watching the fundamentals of query tuning class if you don't have my mastering ones, but the mastering server tuning class really goes into detail. You don't have to watch the other classes before jumping to that either. This is one of those modules that kind of stands alone. So if you have my live class season pass, you can jump straight into mastering server tuning, the abnormal parallelism module, but it's very, very fun. Good to see you, Ernesto. Next highest voted question is Scott McFadden asks, I enjoyed the fundamentals of database administration. Will there be a Masters of Database Administration class? No, you know what's funny? So I stopped doing production database administration a few years ago. I don't manage people's servers directly anymore. I don't manage their clusters or their log shipping. And I feel like I don't know enough to teach that anymore because my skills have kind of drifted out of date. I feel like if I'm not actively doing something, I would be a sham if I taught it. Not everybody feels that way, but I feel that way. I want to stand up with credibility, and if I am teaching you something and you ask a question, by God, I want to be able to answer that question. I don't want to tell you what the book says. I want to tell you what the truth is. So I don't teach that class anymore, and I don't see that returning ever because I don't ever want to go back to production database administration. It sucks. Being on call? Are you kidding me? I got a whiskey calendar for Advent. It's got like 24 different whiskeys in it. I want to go get drunk on the weekend. Like the last thing that I want to do is be on call because some yo-yo decided to drop a database. No, I can refuse like any production DBA offer. I've been down that road. That is not going to happen. So that class won't be coming back. And I don't know anybody who's teaching a class like that right now either, because in a lot of the training community, people are distracted by the cloud and I'm looking up as if the cloud is here. People are distracted by the cloud in the sense that they want to train on that, And they're also burning a lot of labor because the training changes so fast for up in the cloud. So it's kind of tricky how that works. But so anyway, what I was saying in there about feeling like a sham. I don't think that you can teach a mastering production database administration class without PowerShell, and I just don't know a single line of PowerShell. SQL Dev DBA says I offer a JAG project 7 and 8. So you said 7/8. It would have to be a 7 and 8, just like as a starting bonus. That's really funny. Next up, Amit asks, what are the factors we need to consider when splitting TempDB into multiple files? Is it one file per processor core, or does it depend on the scenario? So in my Fundamentals of TempDB class that's coming on Monday is the first edition of that, I'll tell you that you want to start with either 4 or 8 TempDB files, depending on whose stuff you read and why. And I explain the logic behind that, how page latch contention works, and all kinds of other good stuff. So I'm fine with either 4 or 8 TempDB files as a starting point. And in that Fundamentals of TempDB class, I talk about the kinds of issues that would cause you to break it out into more files, aka latch contention. But I'm going to give you a blog post to go read instead in the meantime. So if you search for Brent Ozar TempDB cheat sheet. So if you search for Brent Ozar TempDB cheat sheet, that right there is a cheat sheet that you can use to go learn how to configure TempDB and why. And it's totally free. It's absolutely totally free. You can read through that there. So there we go. G Surgeon from the Netherlands. Good to see you. All right, what do we got next? Let's see here. The next highest voted question. I'm going to go ahead and stop taking questions just because we've got about 20 minutes left to go, and I want to let y'all vote out of the questions that are remaining to pick the ones that we tackle with the time that we have left. It's the first time I've ever used that button on a webcast. It's kind of cool. I kind of like it. Next up, let's see here. The next highest voted one. Whoo! Joachim asks, my predecessor used one collation and another collation. Is it necessary to migrate all the databases? Oh God, no. Do not try to move collations. Don't try to move data between collations because it sucks. It involves exporting the data and re-importing it again, and it is completely painful. What I would tell you for in the future is don't change collations. Like, leave it wherever it's at. You need to have an incredibly huge reason as to why you would want to change collations, because otherwise, when you join between two different collations, you can run into case mismatch errors. You can force them with hints with like collate database default, and then you end up with crappy performance. So leave the collations where they are. Just don't touch those. Don't make any changes to those. Next up, Sashin says, do you think having a good knowledge about storage is a prerequisite for being a good performance tuning DBA? That's a really interesting question. So I became a storage admin at one point in my career because I thought that I needed it in order to become a better database administrator. Because at the time, everything was on premises. This is back before the cloud popped up. So today, I would say it depends a lot on where your SQL server lives and what kind of storage it is. For example, if you're on Azure or Amazon, you do have to understand about how storage works, specifically storage in that cloud vendor. And just because you understand one cloud vendor doesn't mean you understand the other. And it changes really fast. Like at AWS reInvent last week, they released even more changes to the way that their storage works. So in there, I think that if you're in the cloud, you do have to know. If you're on premises, I think it's less important. It's not that storage can't be slow on premises, it's that it's really hard to change. On premises, it's not really easy to say, well, I'd like to redo all our storage, because the SAN admins and the other sysadmins will put a quick stop to that. It's just too risky to change things like that. It only really matters when you're building brand new SQL servers from scratch. The rest of the time, you just can't change storage all that quickly. Whereas up in the cloud, you really can, because it's such a low barrier to entry to redesign a server storage again from scratch. Next up, Bart says, my colleagues add with NoLock to all our queries because it's not supposed to lock any rows in our transactional DBs. Is that right? So it's right in the sense that it doesn't lock rows. It does lock the table. And what I mean by that is that when you run a query with NoLock, SQL Server still acquires a schema stability lock, which means that other people can't change the table in a way that would shape your rows differently. For example, someone can't suddenly add a new column, because you wouldn't want your selects to be churning through data and then all of a sudden have more columns than they had before. So NoLock still takes out that schema stability lock. It just doesn't lock any rows as it's ripping through the data. Now there's a drawback with that. NoLock will let you read rows twice, skip rows altogether, see data that was never committed, and your query can fail with an error. Could not continue scan with NoLock due to data movement. I'm going to show it to you, because people always think it's never happened to me before, so it must be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of queries, and then, Mr. Swart, good to see you. I'm going to grab a couple of queries and then show you those. So let's paste that. Whoops, that's not it. Let's copy that and then paste that over here. Copy this and then paste this over here. So let's put this in over here. Well, that's not the right query. I needed something else. So let me go grab that, copy, and then paste, and then move this over here. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. So over on the right-hand side, first I'm going to make sure that I don't have any indexes in this particular copy of stack. Over on the right-hand side, I'm going to run a select count star query. Whoops, let me move things around just a little bit so that you can see that even there. There we go. So right now, I'm running a select query with NoLock. I'm saying, go ahead and get me all of the users whose display name equals Alex. Do that 20 times in a row. So as you can see, there are 831 rows that come back from here. So I can run this over and over again. I get the exact same 831 rows every time it runs. However, now I'm going to run an update. Over on the left-hand side, I'm going to go run an update, and I'm going to say, go set the location and website URL for everyone whose display name is not Alex. Now, just to be really clear, over on the right-hand side, its display name equals Alex. Left-hand side, anything other than Alex. If this was a Venn diagram, these two windows have no overlap at all. I am also not doing inserts, and I'm not doing deletes. All I'm doing over here is changing the people who are not Alex. And yet, when I start this transaction and then run the select count star, I can get completely wacko results while that other query is running. NoLock will literally give you random results. And at first this doesn't look that bad because my database is really small that I'm dealing with here. Here, only during the update, all hell breaks loose. And then within milliseconds afterwards, things seem to be okay again. And people, when they run queries with NoLock, they go, well, it seems like it's okay. I ran the report a couple of times. It didn't seem like anything was changing because the data's still small. But watch what happens when I switch over to a much larger database. So I'm going to switch over to, oops, let's go commit. Let's switch over to a much larger database. And this one, it's the same exact structure. It's just that this database is a whole lot larger. Over on the right-hand side, I'm going to run my select count star, and I'm going to run it 20 times and go see how many rows return back. So here there are like 10,000 people whose display name is Alex. I can keep running the same thing over and over again, but watch what happens now when I run a transaction. Execute, execute. If I gave you $1,000 to predict the next row that would come out of here, I'd still have all my money in my pocket. NoLock will literally give you random data. Now, that can be okay. I have clients, for example, where they're trying to measure how many sales have flowed through their e-commerce carts in the last 30 seconds. They're just trying to go through and make sure that some data is flowing through their shopping carts. They don't really care if it's transactionally accurate. All they want to see is, have people been placing orders? They don't care if the numbers go up and down from time to time. NoLock works beautifully there, but the rest of the time, NoLock is a pretty bad idea. Should give a quick shout out to our sponsor this week. Quest is doing a database virtual summit this week. If you go over to brentozar.com/go/quest, on Wednesday, they're running a completely free conference with 3 separate tracks, including optimization and hybrid cloud. So you can register for that over at brentozar.com/go/quest and see the agenda too as well. It's totally free, and even if you can't make it during the all-day session on Wednesday, they'll also email you the links to the recordings, and that'll be the only way that you can get access to the recordings. I'm not presenting at that one, just so you know, so you don't expect, but other people are, other people that I know. So you can go hit over at that over at brentozar.com/go/quest. All right, let's see what question we're going to take next here. Let's come over here. The Almighty Beard says, "Hi Brent, where did you get your awesome year calendar?" If you search for Everyday Calendar Simone, Simone Yetch is a maker out of the LA area now, and she put that together. She's taking pre-orders now. That one was part of the Kickstarter, but she's taking pre-orders now, and the new version ships. It's the same thing, it's just she did another round of them. The new version ships in, I think February, ballpark. So there we go. Kieran says, can NoLock corrupt indexes? SQL Server ignores NoLock hints on data changes. So like you can't use NoLock when you're doing writes. Of course, that would kind of blow away the process there. Next up, Philip asks, I have views that query a linked server. Oh, God. Oh. No. That I have jobs that run stored procs to select the results into tables. This is how I'm taking snapshots of production data for use in reporting consideration or for this approach. Yeah, no, don't do that. If you need to move data from one server to another, use tools like SSIS or Azure Data Factory to avoid problems with distributed transactions, blocking. These tools are much more tuned for that kind of purpose. So what's going to happen is after my stream ends, we're going to switch over and raid Andy Leonard's channel, and then that way you'll be able to watch and learn about SQL Server Integration Services, Azure Data Factory, etc. from Andy Leonard. I don't use those technologies only because I specialized so much, but I recommend those technologies really highly. Next up, let me go make sure I have my Twitch prep over there so that I can do the stream or do the raid afterwards. Good. Andy's going to talk about best practices. For once, huh? I'm sick and tired of hearing your worst practices. When are you going to start doing the good stuff? That's what I get for trash talking. It's I get hiccups. Robert says, how much does the increment size for shrink file affect runtime? Is there a lot of overhead fixing an oopsie daisy? So if you're asking that question, I kind of have a feeling that it's a big oopsie daisy. The thing that I always I keep this on my desk to remind people to put it into perspective. This is a 128 gig flash drive, and I kind of joke that, see, it's so small that the camera won't even focus on it. This is a 128 gig flash drive. If you're worried about this kind of size, stop. You can buy these at Staples for like $50 or whoever your nearest. I don't even know if Staples is still in business. I don't shop at a lot of office stores. Amazon. Why did I just say Amazon? So if you're talking about this kind of storage, I just wouldn't worry that much about it. It's not big data these kinds of days. If we're talking about a terabyte, that's a different story. So for that, I'll show you a blog post. So if I go over here and I say Brent Ozar shrink file, and up here it has, what do you do if you really need to shrink a database? And the answer is, what you want to do is go build a brand new file group with new files, and you migrate the data over into there instead. This is a much lower level of invasiveness for stuff. It's much easier to deal with from a performance perspective, keeps more stuff online, and doesn't do one 8K page at a time the way DBCC shrink file does. All right, and we'll do one more question. We'll take the next highest one. Let's see. Oh, there are 3 with exactly 3 votes, so I will pick from those. Oh, okay, I'm taking Romans. No, I'll take a couple of these because there are a couple that I can answer quickly. Roman says, have you seen the new Babelfish service that allows you to run SQL Server code on Postgres? It's not available yet. I've signed up for the beta for whenever it ships because I just love to learn, and that's the kind of thing that I love to learn. Richie and I use Amazon Aurora Postgres, which lets Postgres be on the front end, but Amazon's fancy Aurora storage engine on the back end, and I love it. It's phenomenal. We run a roughly 2 terabyte data warehouse on it with tables with 1 billion plus rows. Can't say enough good stuff about it. Now, it's not cheap in the sense that you're, no, Brent's just crazy. That part is true. It's not cheap in the sense that you really are paying someone else to manage it for you, but it's cheaper than Richie and I trying to learn how to administer Postgres and make it go fast and do backup and recovery. Michael says we're very curious about Babelfish too. Knowing you though, Michael, and the amount of edge case features that y'all use, like the hackathon, the in-memory temp tables kind of thing, I'd be surprised if they're going to be anywhere near the capabilities that SQL Server is anytime soon. Oh, good. Andy's up. All right, perfect. So I'll raid him after I answer the next question. And then the last question that we'll do is from Lee. Lee says, do you have any experience using managed instances? Have you noticed any weirdness or things unique to them? I've tried a couple of client forklifts where the clients have been tempted to move to managed instances. And I've said, okay, look, let's just go restore your databases over there and go see how it goes. And we've hit a couple of showstoppers around features that weren't supported. Don't quote me because it's been a while since I did this, but I want to say linked servers was one of them, like that we couldn't do linked servers up there and that the client needed it for something. One thing that I do kind of have to caution people about is the restore time. You're not restoring one database with these. When you want to do a restore, you're restoring the whole server. And you're restoring it under a different name. So you basically standing up a brand new server from scratch. And there's no timing on it. There's no service level guarantee. You could be out for hours. So I've seen people try to do migrations and test a restore with no activity happening. And they're like, oh, great, this works beautifully. And then we do a load test for like 4 hours and then try to restore to a point fairly close to when the load test ended. And we have had really bad problems with the restores on those. So those would be the 2 things that I would watch out for. First, restore your app. Make sure all the features that you need actually work over there. And second, understand what the restore timeline will look like when you're doing a restore. I love the technology. Technology is great. I think this is the way of the future, one of many ways of the future, but I like it a lot. I would be wholeheartedly interested in it if I had to manage an availability group myself, because managing availability groups sucks rocks. And I would always rather pay someone else to do that. So that's the answer to that one. So thanks a lot, y'all, for hanging out with me during my stream. I will do this again tomorrow, and tomorrow I should be able to do a full 2 hour, I believe, question and answer session. I have the emergency client over the weekend that starts at about an hour, so I got to go prep for that. But then I'll have the full blown stream tomorrow. I am now going to switch you over to Andy Leonard's stream. Andy Leonard does SQL Server Integration Services and Azure Data Factory. He does all kinds of architecture work around how do you get highly scalable ETL processes. For those of you watching on Facebook and YouTube, you'll need to go to Twitch. You go to twitch.tv/Andy Leonard to go watch along with him. So let's go get that raid started, and y'all have a wonderful evening or morning. Let's see here. Raid Andy Leonard. Let's see if that works. And I want to say that there's a countdown timer on this. Let's go find out. Oh, Surly Dev says he's on YouTube too. Oh, that's kind of awesome. Now, I think, do I have to stop this? Here we go. All right, adios, y'all.